Ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor of giving the introductory remarks today. Let me first say that I want to thank you all for the effort. It's been a very challenging getting here to the summit of the SDGs with all the security in New York. So I have to recognize the effort that every one of you has made to join us. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here in the United Nations. We are eager to keep building blocks for strengthening capabilities on the aging process, in particular toward the effective protection, meaningful, free, and active participation of older persons through an international and legally binding list. We celebrate the participation of civil society and the private sector in this process. We strongly believe that joining efforts contributes to raising awareness and bridges path for advancing aging issues in a truly comprehensive. The goal concerns all of us. Increasing longevity is the result of progress achieved in human development and health over the last decades. This global demographic change has made visible existing gaps in laws, mechanisms, policies, and programs for older persons. Leaving no one behind implies addressing different vulnerabilities, including those coming from aging. Therefore, strengths and challenges in this process should always be considered so persons become actors of their own destiny. Although states have primarily responsibility to promote, protect, respect, and fulfill human rights, there is a paramount role of the different stakeholders to support for shaping and duly implementing an adequate legal framework. I would like to highlight some of the benefits that they bring an international convention. For older persons and their families, existing of a binding international framework for the effective prevention, redress, and accountability of human rights abuses. Effective mechanisms at the national and international level for improving accessibility, as well as other conditions that shall be made to live with dignity, including the adequate treatment of complaints. Legal backup to avoid prolonged victimization and fight against impunity. Contributions to clarify prosecution and raising awareness aspects as a reference to avoid social injustices under the principle of non-repetition. For states, the effective binding tool that will contribute to fulfill the primary responsibility of states to promote and protect human rights and fundamental freedoms, as well as to comply with their obligations under human rights treaties and agreements to which they are party. Contributions to the development of international law, in particular international human rights law, in addition to strengthening the universal system. Support for interstate commitment as a way to keep fostering international cooperation. Reduction of country risks by enhancing legal certainty for different kinds of migration and investment purposes. Fostering dialogue among different stakeholders involved. The adaptation and improvement of national mechanisms derived from commitments assumed by the ratification of an instrument of binding nature. For the private sector, legal certainty of their investments due to clear rules, motivation to invest in states parties to the treaty, clear rules for inadequate promotion and fair competition between companies by avoiding the human rights issues of older persons are only used as marketing. Strengthening the corporate image of fully respecting human rights for older persons during the activities, including those of their participation. Advisory opinions for the respective treaty body of the instrument as a reference to the proper management of activities, and contribution to the international human rights system based on its commitment to fulfill the treaty. For society in general, a treaty would be an effective tool due to its binding nature for the prevention and fight against impunity, for the human rights abuses for all the people of all older people face, as part of the guarantees offered under normative frameworks in states governing of the rule of law. Generation of balanced conditions to address challenges in the protection and participation of older persons. Support for the promotion and responsible social norms and actions to avoid human violations. Provisions to precedent and benchmarks derived from the development of international law and the international community's response to the struggle that has been going on for over the years. Ladies and gentlemen, I commend all the efforts made toward this goal of mutual benefit. In this regard, initiatives such as this event are key to representing an opportunity to enhance the capabilities toward a culture of learning. We are 1 billion persons in the world who are aging. We will be 2 billion persons by the year 2050. We are more aging persons than children being born. It's a paradigm shift in the social structure of the world. We need to address it fully. The motivation is to protect the rights of the most vulnerable. Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Francis West. I'm the founder of Francis West & Co. And I am delighted to be here as the moderator of this panel. And thank you, Ambassador Davis, for that great introduction. Like Ambassador mentioned, that aging is a global topic, and that we are, as a society, rapidly and entering a new era where we're going to deal with a lot more aging issues and challenges, and also opportunities. And today we have this great opportunity to host a panel with both civil societies and private sectors, and along with the UN officers, to really work on to create a framework of the future where we see collaboration between all these different groups as not just nice to have, but necessary, because it is a societal and global challenges and opportunity that's in front of us. So let me just do a quick introduction of the panelists, and then I'm going to pose a couple umbrella questions to ask each of the panelists to speak to their perspective from civil society, from a private sector, and so on, to share with the audience. So to my right is Bethany Brown, and she is currently the International Network for Prevention for Elder Abuse and Associate Social Affairs Officer at the United Nations. And right next to him is Michael Phillip, the Technology Strategy and Relationships Director of AARP, or the American Association of Retired Persons. And Hazel Moran, Vice President, Global Patient Insights and Advocacy at EMD Serono Inc., which is the healthcare business of Merck KGaA, Darmstadt, Germany. And then Hillary Wold, Principal at Boston Consulting Group, BCG, Healthcare and People Strategy and Disability Advocate. Last but not the least, Sophia Nera, Vice President of Global Initiative on Aging, Board Member, Head of International Projects, and Deputy Chief of Aging Collaborations, Civil Malaga, UNITAR, United Nations Agency. So with this distinct panel, I'm going to ask each one of them to actually give a kind of an overarching a comment of two basic questions. Number one is, why do we care about the UN Convention for Older Persons? What will we gain from passing this treaty? And what do we lose if we don't do it? And the second question is, can we and should we establish a collaboration framework that combines civil society, the United Nations policymaker, along with the private sector, so we can drive growth and participation of all aspects of society, including fast evolving digital technology, such as artificial intelligence and environments for the older adults. So with those two umbrella questions, I'm going to turn it over to Bethany for her to make her initial observation and comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francis. And thank you to UNITAR, to G3ICT, and the Global Initiative on Aging Foundation for organizing this conversation. I am a lawyer by training, and I've been working in the field of older persons' human rights for about 15 years in various roles, and I'm so glad to be with you all today. As Ambassador Gallegos has set the scene, I'm hoping that with this talk, we'll come away with a better understanding to be able to work together. Global aging should be embraced as an achievement. More people are living longer. And this magnifies the risk and reward of our current actions for the future. So if we recognize this opportunity and act on it, we have the potential to unlock real growth. If we choose to ignore it, if we choose to have this same old, we're going to have problems later on. And when I say we, I mean all of us in this room who will be older in the future. For example, the Millennium Development Goals, the original development process here at the UN from 2000, did not include older persons. The Sustainable Development Goals, there's an SDG summit happening today here at the UN, includes some references to older persons and aging. But in this General Assembly session, the Secretary General has reported on an analysis of 291 voluntary national reviews on achieving those goals. And it has found that older persons are not yet being recognized by more than a passing reference, and it's usually related to Social Security. Older persons have as much of a right to benefit from Social Security as anyone else, or from social development as anyone else. And they have the right to contribute. They have the right to benefit, and they have the right to contribute. So I would caution against any look at older persons as a blanket vulnerable group. We really pushed hard in the negotiations for the Sustainable Development Goals to make sure that we were looking at older people as individuals, as people who are impacted by the circumstances that they're under. And we are valuing their intrinsic value as humans, not their productivity, when we talk about their rights to be involved in development. Yes, many older people are productive and they have the right to contribute and be involved in that, but not all older people are, and they still have value as people. Here at the UN, another great thing that the UN has done, that the General Assembly has done, to try to act on this coming incoming group of older people, incoming class of older people, we could call ourselves, is the establishment of an open-ended working group for the purpose of strengthening the human rights of older persons. This started in 2010, and it has a mandate for the purpose of strengthening, thank you, the protection of the human rights of older persons by considering the existing international framework for human rights for older persons and identifying possible gaps and how best to address them, including by considering as appropriate the feasibility of further instruments and measures. This was way back in 2010. This group has met almost annually since then. And what these intensive processes have shown is that there are indeed many rights that are not recognized for older persons. They're excluded from enjoying their rights on an equal basis in older age. Violence and abuse, for example, was discussed in 2011, in 2012, in 2014, in 2017. And we know that older men are not protected by many laws that are designed to protect women, and older women are not protected by many laws that are designed to protect younger women. That's just one example. In general, we saw the right to be free from discrimination run through many of these topics that were discussed over these years. And that is the compelling reason to create a legal instrument. It's a framework that addresses the many ways that older persons' rights require specific elaboration. The evidence is overwhelming, and there is broad consensus on the scale and nature of the problems that older persons face. And the question is whether a new treaty is likely to make a unique and significant contribution to major conceptual and systemic change. We know that thematic conventions such as CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, on the rights of the child, on the rights of persons with disabilities, have made significant contributions to how we see those groups, how we react to the different ways that people engage in life with those perspectives. And there is every reason to be confident that a convention on the rights of older persons would have a similar impact. The last open-ended working group in April took a decision to consider the existing international framework on human rights for older persons and the identification of possible gaps in an intersessional way between member states here at the UN. So they wanted to get together and talk intergovernmentally about what the gaps are and how best to address them. They've had a series of briefings since then to hear from the UN system, to hear from the UN treaty bodies. And they'll hear on November 20th from civil society and national human rights institutions about what they would like to see in a negotiated text of recommendations for submission to the open-ended working group, which will likely be at the end of March in 2024. A convention holds the possibility to change the relationship between older persons and governments. One of my favorite ways to describe human rights is they're what governs the relationships between individuals and the state. States cannot delegate their duties to their people, to family members, or to companies. And I see a role to play for business to support a convention by doing the right thing, even without a convention, by leading the way to show that it works, by supporting older people's human rights as they align with their business interests. For example, training artificial intelligence, large language models to include the perspectives of older persons, which are currently lacking. There are ways that all kinds of businesses regularly violate older persons' rights by discriminatory hiring practices or promotion practices, by blanket mandatory retirement contracts, by failing to provide reasonable accommodations to caregivers with older persons relying on them. Are these companies doing something that's illegal right now? No. In most cases, they can probably get away with it, but should they? Are they doing what they should? As Ambassador Gallegos mentioned, it can be a source of legal certainty and fairness where companies can come together and know what the playing field really says. Corporations can also support older persons' human rights by supporting civil society and the voices of older persons themselves. There are organizations all over the world that focus on pensions, that focus on the rights of widows, where older people themselves have gotten together and know what they want. They want to represent themselves with their own voices. Corporations can encourage the adoption and ratification of this treaty when we do get it. And I know that IBM did just that for the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities here in the US. According to the guiding principles on business and human rights, business is expected to respect human rights, meaning that they should avoid infringing on human rights and address adverse human rights impacts for things that they're involved in. Business has a role to play in promoting these standards. And when it comes to the actual elaboration of the convention, I would like to point out two areas of concern that I think that we should all keep in mind as we move forward, because to know how each of us has a role to play allows us to work together the best. The first thing that I would point out is the shareholder primacy principle, which is something here in the US, specifically in Delaware, where most Fortune 500 companies are domiciled. This is the rule. And what this principle says, this shareholder primacy principle says, is that companies must be operated in the interests of their shareholders. They can't be operated in the interests of their customers. They can't be operated in the interests of even their employees. And in practice, this means that companies can't necessarily put the rights of older persons ahead of what their business interests might be in. And these interests can sometimes be in direct opposition to older persons' rights. For example, in 2013, Johnson & Johnson and its subsidiaries paid more than $2.2 billion to resolve a criminal and civil liability claim that arose from the way that they were marketing drugs and the payment of kickbacks to physicians and the nation's largest long-term care pharmacy provider. And years later, we're still seeing nursing facilities that are administering these drugs that nearly double the risk of death in older people with dementia. There are 179,000 people each week that are given these drugs in nursing homes here in the US. There's also a risk to older people's voice. I think that when we look at how we all play together, when we look at how we can all work together, we really need to put older people's voice at the center. We need to be making sure that other voices are not drowning their voices out. This is another thing that I saw in a lot of my work. for Human Rights Watch, where national conversations were dominated by the interests of aged care companies, for example. Or here in New York, the government recently announced advisory council for nursing home reform. And this advisory council did not include a single older person or person living in a nursing home. That shouldn't be the way that we think about how we're going to move forward and how we're going to make change in this world. There is a huge opportunity for those companies that seek to do the right thing. For example, research from AARP shows that multi-generational companies are good for business. We can see that as we look ahead to the negotiation process for a convention, we're looking at an opportunity to improve the way that we see things, to improve the norms, what we think is normal, what we think is right for older persons' equality. And it's conversations just like this that we're having with them that'll help to take us there. So thank you again to UNITAR, to G3ICT, and to the Global Initiative on Aging Foundation for bringing us all together. Thanks, Francis.
Oh, thank you, Bethany, for give such a holistic and a complete overview of the challenges and also why we need to have a legal framework. As we move on to the next speakers, because we have such an esteemed speaker, I just want to make sure that we are conscious of the time we've talked about before. But it struck me that, Bethany, when you mentioned that, globally, there are many organizations that's come together to promote the issues or challenges with people who are older. And I know here in the United States, AARP, it's probably one of the biggest organizations in the world representing the wishes of the people with disability, people who are older, and 35 million members. So with that, Michael, I would love to hear from you in terms of what AARP has been doing, and specifically, especially in areas such as the technology that I know that you've been working on, and to share with the audience.
Absolutely. And Francis, first of all, thank you very much for getting us here in this room today with so many important people. And thank you, Ambassador Gallegos. We really appreciate it on this important day, first day of an important week. I'm Michael Phillips with AARP. If you're not familiar with AARP, as Francis mentioned, we're the largest nonprofit organization focused on older adults in the United States with 34 million members. Our international affairs work is set up to be a convener of international civil society, governments, and nonprofit and private sector organizations that are working towards the needs of older adults. We organize all of our work around 3 pillars, and digital connection is underlying those 3 pillars.
Your attention, please, at 10 a.m. in the press briefing room.
It includes the 3 pillars include healthy aging, financial security, and meaningful social connection, all of which in this digital world that we're in now increasingly requires some type of online connectivity. We know that globally, older adults are underserved in the digital world and are working hard to try to close that gap. I think the interesting thing of where we are right now in this moment in history, and AARP is a supporter of the International Convention, is that the barriers and challenges with connecting all of the different communities of older persons around the globe is changing rapidly, and in a lot of ways, in positive ways. And we've learned a lot from closing the digital divide in developing countries that are now being kind of leapfrogged and implemented in other countries in amazing ways and very impactful ways. We track at AARP, we track 5 barriers to digital connection for older persons. And the first is infrastructure and affordable access. The good news is that in developing nations, since the pandemic, that barrier has been addressed in large. Here in the United States, 90% of adults 50 plus now carry a smartphone, and 98% have some device that connects them online, which is good. And then we see in developing nations, we're able to kind of leapfrog some of the challenges and go straight to like 5G infrastructures and governments that are starting to understand the importance of the economic importance of subsidies towards affordable access and devices, which is all good news. The second barrier that we follow is digital skills and digital literacy. Here in the United States is through our partners with Oats and Senior Planet. And we've been able to take some of the learnings there and apply it globally. And there's some good news stories there as well. We found that these digital skills programs require three components. It requires a funder, and we increasingly look to private sector for that funding, because they have a lot to gain in this world where the number of people who can take advantage of those services are increasing. Second is a good solid curriculum that can be updated and tailored for particular communities. With that, we see artificial intelligence being a super charger there to get the right language and right community unique features into the different curriculums. And third, you have to have a local partner. And so that the convening of those three bodies to cross the digital skills gap has been an important model that we've been following and promoting globally. The third area, and one that Francis and I love to sit around and talk about, is user-friendly, user-accessible design. And what we're seeing in the United States, where access is now at 90% and above, is that it's the design and the other three barriers that are, or the other two barriers that are becoming the bigger impact, the bigger challenge. We agree, Bethany mentioned, older adults is not a number, it's not an age. Every unique experience, every unique life lived experience is important. And people are going through different life stages where as they age and need and have different accessibility concerns, different usability concerns. The fourth barrier I'll just mention briefly is trust and privacy, which I think Bethany and Francis both touched on. If people don't trust the technology, they're not going to use it, they're not going to adopt it. And we break that down into fraud and scams, which target older adults more heavily, misinformation, which is growing, cyber risks, and the fourth is data transparency and data usage, which it's imperative that private sector adhere to those types of important policies. And then the last one is just awareness, and people don't know. It's moving so fast. The world is accelerating so quickly. There's so much innovation coming forward. How do people know which tools, offerings, and services are useful for them? So I'm so excited about this group of people in the room today, because we have the right people from different sectors to think about how different collaborations, alliances, networks, and partnerships can address each of these barriers individually for the unique needs around the globe. So Francis, thank you for that.
Thank you. It's interesting in Bethany's opening comment, you talked about, older people is not a group. We have to think of them as an individual. And then Michael, you mentioned, design for the individual needs. And I know that, when I was at IBM, we were looking at the market. We knew that the technology is going from what we call system focus, the big box, processing large content, to what we call the consumerization or personalization of technology. In other words, each person now have a computer in their own hands. So that means that we're going from, instead of segmentation of, say, design for the baby boomers, Gen Zers, we're designing for what we call the power of one, right? And then, and also there were questions about, what does private sector, what's the private sector's responsibility? Can the legal framework encourage positive behaviors? Now, as we're debating or helping to drive this convention, there are companies that are already ahead of the curve, what I call the innovators, such as the Serrano company, that they actually has gone beyond any kind of a legal framework and started not just looking at this as a area, but has started actioning. So I would love to have Hazel and Lorraine to take this opportunity to share some of the best practice that your company already implementing.
Thank you. Thank you, Francis, and thank you, Ambassador Gallegos, for the invitation. It's an honor to be here to represent the private sector. And as you mentioned, I work for EMD Serono, which is the healthcare biopharmaceutical business of Merck KGaA, Darmstadt, Germany. And what we do is create advancements and innovations to improve the quality of life and prolong the life of many patients, including patients who are living with cancer or multiple sclerosis, for example. And our company sees our role as an important role of many actors in the ecosystem when it comes to providing solutions for the aging population. One of the issues that I think we are really focusing in on, we started in 2017, was looking at caregivers because they play such a critical role in the healthcare continuum, and they're often overlooked or ignored, or they're burnt out. And as a healthcare company, it's hard for us not to look at the caregiver as a holistic approach and the care team that's involved in providing care to patients. So I'm really encouraged by the other panelists today who have already talked about some of the things that we're actually doing and putting into practice. Some of the things that I'd love to be able to follow up with you online is a digital ethics committee that we have, where we've invited patients who are over 65, who are helping us shape and design some of our policies internally. But as an employer, we do have an obligation, as 20% of caregivers so there are 20% of estimated caregivers in the US, and that's similar to Europe. And they have an outsized role. And oftentimes they're not equipped to do the caregiving role, the day-to-day tasks, and they need training. And they need to be involved in the discussion. So our company is really looking at ways where we can include, in an inclusive way, hearing the voice of patients, caregivers, and really using that to what we call as patient-directed, where we listen to, learn from, and act on what matters most to patients and families. And I say that because I come from a patient advocacy community prior to coming to industry. We know the important voice that people with lived experiences have and lend to initiatives that companies run. So as an employer, we have created programs for our caregivers. We have an employee resource group. We have trainings that we launched in 2021 about how to, as managers, understand the role of caregivers and really find ways to make sure that we're sensitized to the caregiver issues. So that's a mandatory training that we launched in 2021. We've also done our own surveys of caregivers during the pandemic, and we surveyed 9,000 caregivers, unpaid caregivers, around the world in 12 countries. And we found that many of them, 53% in fact, that they needed more training on digital and online tool. How to use telehealth was a big focus area. And they're not getting this. We're assuming that caregivers know how to do these things, that they really don't have the tools. So that's why we are really trying to do more as a private sector to partner and collaborate with the private sector, the public, sort of public officials, with NGOs, to really try to do more to improve the outcomes of patients. I would say that in addition to training, in addition to providing patient voice into the conversation, I think we need to do a better job of funding. And I work in a position where I can provide support to patient organizations that oftentimes are offering a safety net where patients can't get access from their physicians or from community centers. Patient organizations really are answering the call, much like caregivers, to provide connectivity with other patients, to have resources or education on specific disease areas. So a role that industry can play is supporting trusted patient organizations in the community globally who have reach and can really make an impact when it comes to helping patients who happen to be aging population. So I really do want to thank the organizers for inviting me today I know we have a chance to answer other questions, but it is really an important topic for us as a company, and we look forward to collaborating.
Thank you, Hazel. In kind of doing a little bit of a background research on some of the topics, and I was actually stunned by one statistics that was published by AARP that the value the family caregiver provides, it's close to $600 billion. And that another Blue Cross and Blue Shield statistic says that about $44 billion cost is associated with 650,000 job loss and 800,000 missing work because due to aging elder cares. So another interesting statistics that we talked about here, we talked about how aging, kind of a sector really potentially can contribute significantly to the employment and also economic growth of the society and countries around the world. And that I guess in Europe already 20% of the workers are over age 55. And here in the United States by 2030, that the 50+ worker will continue to grow. Actually, it will be the only segment that will grow in terms of a percentage of a workplace participation, whereas the other groups, in some cases, due to decreasing birth rate, will actually decrease. So on that note, I'm going to ask Hillary Wool from Boston Consulting Group, because I know that Boston BCG has done a lot of research in this area, specifically in the employment area. Would love to hear on your perspective and how your company view the future of older people's participation, especially in the employment area.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Francis and Ambassador Gallegos. It's an absolute privilege to be here and to be representing BCG. So I'm a principal at Boston Consulting Group, and I have the privilege of working across the intersection of healthcare, public sector, as well as digital and people topics. So all of which are inextricably intertwined with this topic of aging as we move forward. And I also lead some of our research around disability, inclusion, and the workplace. And across some of the research that we've done, as well as some of my client experiences serving health systems that serve millions of older people across the United States, I think we've learned a lot about the current state of workplaces and what the future holds, and really where that gap is. To take a step back before I address Francis' question directly, I think a lot of our research at BCG across industries points to the importance of fostering an aging in place ecosystem, which is something that we currently lack. To me, the pillars of that aging in place ecosystem involve accessible communities, inclusive digital transformations, flexible employers, which I'll talk about and dive into in a moment, and inclusive digital transformations. And Michael, thank you for speaking about that, and Hazel touching on that as well. Why is aging in place so important? Well, research from across the globe, including from our partners at AARP, indicates that the vast majority of older people around the world want to live and age in their own communities rather than living in residential facilities. From looking at the social determinants of healthcare, we see that living in one's own community is often associated with better health outcomes, with a lower risk of disease. And it also just strengthens the bonds, the contributions that older people can make, right within their communities. But with exceptions, such as the work that's been done in Singapore, we just don't see those models in as many places as we would want. And I think the other element of this is there's simply not sufficient supply in kind of long-term care facilities, in order to, provide that kind of care. And so how does this relate to the question of employers? So employers play a critical role, I think, through two different lenses. So the first, as Francis alluded to, is around employing older persons. And the second as Hazel was talking about, also as caregivers of older persons. Both groups are really, really important when we think about employers. And so starting with older persons in the workplace, some seniors want to continue working beyond 65 for a mix of financial and personal reasons, but far too often companies are not equipped to meet their needs or they're overlooking them. Recently, some of my colleagues worked with a food and beverage provider in the US, for example, that they wanted to expand their labor pools, and they realized that they were relying pretty much solely on younger workers, but the job itself was not suitable really for people with disabilities, for older persons, because it was so physically demanding in nature. It required standing on your feet all day and doing highly physical tasks in food service. And so my colleagues really encouraged them, right, through analyzing the landscape and looking at the benefits that having older people in the workplace could provide, to really encourage how could they modify some of those roles to be more inclusive of other populations, to modify those job descriptions to allow a broader group of cohorts to be there. Much of my work, as Francis alluded to over the past year, has focused on how to promote workplace accessibility and inclusion. And these strategies are beneficial for older people, they're beneficial for people with disabilities, but we found through our research that they're beneficial for everyone. When employers implement policies like flexible work, when they have user-friendly approaches to reasonable accommodations, when they really promote a culture of normalizing access needs, normalizing accommodations, not only do people with disabilities, do older people benefit, but everyone in the organization benefits, and everyone has a more inclusive experience and feels more empowered to bring their full selves to work, to bring their experiences individually, and to bring the experiences of their families. And so, older employees need to be seen as assets in the federal government, and I serve, clients in the government space. Almost a third of the workforce is 55 or over. And over the coming years across nations, there's going to be a massive transfer of knowledge needed, so much institutional knowledge, so many skills that are going to need to be passed down. And if employers are not cognizant of how to structure work in ways that older people want to pursue, want to engage, structure work in ways that support mentorship, then we're going to lose that. We're going to lose that incredible asset of knowledge and of training and coaching for the younger generations. So then flipping the lens a little bit, looking at employees who are caregivers. So BCG's research about a year ago did some research on the opportunity for the care economy. So looking at, if we think about the missing jobs that are needed to support caring for older people, children, as well as the potential in lost wages, in lost GDP that can come from people leaving the workforce because they're unable to do their caregiving duties while serving the workforce. By 2030, our estimates are that within just the US alone, that's going to be $290 billion per year in GDP lost annually, right? And so there's a massive crisis, a massive need for employers to recognize that a large share of their employees are going to be caregivers, especially if we know that aging in place and living in the community is what older people want for themselves and for their families. And so again, to echo the point, flexible work policies, right? That means, hours, that means being able to take family care leave if needed, for a sick family member, hybrid work. There are a number of different models, both for what we would call desk-based workers and deskless workers as well, healthcare service industries, et cetera. Digital technologies have enabled more workplace flexibility. And while there is, of course, as you all know, an ongoing debate on this, the research continuously demonstrates that for particularly for people with access needs and for caregivers of those with, with access needs, this is absolutely critical. But I think, to the point of why we're here today, I think an international convention can be really a rallying mechanism for the private sector as well as the public sector and civil society. We know from our experiences, for example, with LGBTQ rights, that in some cases, the private sector is often the first mover in championing the rights of people. And I think, in some cases, we see evidence of companies doing the right thing with respect to employment, inclusive design, and other practices. And we want to have a mechanism for, I think, really highlighting those best practices and making it the norm, the standard, and not the exception.
Well, thank you so much for bringing back to why we're here today topic. And I can share that, back in 2006 and 2005, when the UN Convention for the Rights of People with Disability first came on, at that time, there weren't that many private sector that are either ready or willing to go out and to say that we want to be supportive, because I think, this close to 20 years ago, there was still a little bit of a hesitation of what is private sector to do with an organization like the United Nations. But like you mentioned, it really, as we move as a society, and the connectedness of all the countries globally, and whether it's on the supply chain side or just on human side, it's very important to have a kind of overarching organization such as UN that can put out the principles like the SDG, which we are here today celebrating the SDG summit. But then the private sectors are very good at innovating under certain guidelines. And then I think on top of that, you mentioned, both you and Michael mentioned technology, is that if we're going to build the ecosystem, we want to operating from a common ground or common standards or common, beliefs. So again, this rallying point and then bringing together multi stakeholders will give us the opportunity, especially on the technology side, to drive that kind of actioning versus just advocating. So now, not last but not the least, is actually my partner in crime in pulling this session together. I mean, you have no idea how much work, and later on we're going to bring up Excel the Boab, who's really the heart of this. Making this event possible from logistic planning and giving us guidance on that. But Sophia is going to be the next speaker, and I would love to hear from you. And you and I were talking about this event less than 3 weeks ago, and here we are.
Even less.
Less than that, I know. So
if I can share that information.
Yeah. Right. You get a kind of an insider view of how this came about.
Yes, it's been crazy. Thank
Yeah.
you, Francis. First, I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you all the people that are watching this live. And thank you to this amazing team, panelists. Oh my God, how do I follow that? This has been wonderful. We're having a wonderful debate on topics that are not relevant now, but for the future. So I would like to add, because how do you follow that? I would like to add another couple of points to the heart of why do we need a UN International Convention on the older persons. Let me tell you something else that is happening that it hasn't been mentioned. Ageism is the biggest ism that is happening worldwide. We don't like to talk about it, but it's happening. And what this means is that 1 out of 2 people worldwide is suffering some ageist behavior. This is simply not acceptable, simply not acceptable. How do we change that? By having a UN convention that protects, that gives awareness and implemented by the law in a government way, and you have penalties if you don't support this. We have to change the narrative. We have to, it feels like it's a fashion. It feels like talking about getting older is bad. Why is it bad? It's beautiful. There's something beautiful about being young and having all these opportunities ahead of you, but there's something really beautiful about the act of aging. First, we're graceful and grateful to be able to age. And second, we are being granted a lot more years. What this means is that we have to do a lot more things with that. And society, the ecosystem of society is not ready for that because we simply have not lived that long. So what does this mean? We need to create this new ecosystem that has not been put in paper. We have to create it. And this is not just up to the governments, this is up to every civil society, private sector, this is up to every individual. We all can have an input. First, but not being ageist. And this is not just, I find it quite funny when they say, as we are aging, we're losing all these capacities, which I don't agree with it. I mean, we have the science behind it. We gained a lot of capacity. But we always say, even within ourselves, oh, I've forgotten about that. Oh, it's because I'm getting old. My 14-year-old daughter forgets things and she doesn't say it's because I'm a teenager. So this behavior being ageist in society is simply wrong. And how can we change the narrative? How can we make it exciting for society to think, you know, we're aging and I want this third and fourth quarter of my life to count. Now with a UN convention, this is how we make it happen. Can you imagine looking back or asking our younger ourselves, what do you think of yourself on your third and fourth quarter? Well, you want to be inclusive within society. You want to be functional. You want to be heard. Is that what is happening today? It's not. Because even the word retired is wrong. It's like you're abandoned, you're left behind from society, and that should not be the case. We should count into what we are able to do for society. We should have opportunities, and these services that they're not there, that they're not supporting the needs of the aging population, they're not there on all aspects, from a healthcare, social healthcare. They're not, and we need to implement this. And my colleagues have already mentioned all the different points, so I'm not going to repeat on that. But there is another aspect that I find that is fundamental why we need the private sector, because they have a big voice if they want to embrace what it is that we can do. First, starting with the good practice internally. And that makes other sectors, and it makes the public institutions and civil society take notice. Why is this big institution changing the policy, making more flexible working hours? Why are they supporting the needs of the care workers? These people, at the moment that they're 40 and 50s, they have to spend more time, maybe with the parents or even grandparents sometimes. And then we have intergenerational issues that we're not supporting into society. So this is the other point that I wanted to mention. The ecosystem has to be not just about the aging population. It's about the whole world. This is how do we make a world? We have these are our chance. How do we make a society where a more inclusive and this equity and inclusion within each sector becomes implemented? Now we write the law. Now we define that path. And how do we do that? This is up to us. We know that UN Convention will only touch in a few points, but that will be the beginning for everyone else to feel inspired to change the narrative, think about it in a positive way, because why not to be able to choose up until the last breath of your life about what is your purpose and what is your last word that you want to bring into society, instead of that being taken away, that human right being taken away if you go to a residency, for example, not out of choice sometimes. It's out of institutions not being inclusive enough to think about what are our needs. So I'm not going to say any more. I just wanted to add those 2 points, but I would like to leave you with a quote, if I might. So I would like to give you with a quote as a model of the power of hope backed up by action by the gentleman Nelson Mandela. Our human compassion binds us to one another, not in pity or patronizingly, but as human beings who have learned how to turn our common suffering into hope for the future. Isn't that wonderful? That's what we hope here. Let's make that hope a reality. Thank you.
Wow, that's quite a inspirational talk, and I, as a person who's over, I'm not going to say the number, but when I retired from IBM, I said I don't use the word retire. I said I graduated from IBM, because, like you said, I really see this next chapter of my life is the best chapter, where I feel like I have earned the rights only to talk to people I like and do projects that I prefer. But I love your comment about this intergenerational. You know, I mean, this is, of course, this is the term we use today. But if you look at all the, throughout the, the human history, if you go back, actually a lot of the culture have this respect for the elders, right? Whether it's in the tribe, the Indian tribes, and especially from my own heritage, the Chinese culture, you don't get older, you get wiser, right? And there is actually a lot of respect for older people, for their wisdom. And Hillary, earlier you mentioned about the parallel between the aging and people with disabilities. And I remember when I was at IBM and managing the Accessibility Center, actually one of the first briefing we did was with NASA. This is back close to this is 2004. So about, they came in, they talked about a concern about the brain drain of NASA, right? When you think about NASA, they fly, people to the moon. Now we're talking about the Mars. So they're talking about mission critical. You cannot fail. I mean, failure is not an option. It's not like putting a picture on Instagram or, Snapchat or whatever. And they realize the value of the institution, individual knowledge that's gained through years of work. So I'm going to open that up to the panel to see if, from your perspective, from your work, personal observation, or from your work perspective, do you see a shift in understanding and respect for the older people? Not, talk about their disabilities, but about their wisdom and their experience contributing. Definitely.
I have to say that not all older people are wise, and that's okay. Not all of us were wise to begin with. We're not going to be wise in our older age either, and that's okay. We're all different. We're all aging differently. And I want to talk about, I worked for Help Age International for a long time, which works in low and middle income countries, 70 low and middle income countries all over the world. And my job was to advocate for older people's human rights here at the UN. So I would go to the missions for these different countries in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, and talk with the delegates there about older people's rights. And so often I would hear, no, you don't understand. In our country, we respect. And that may be true. There are many countries where if I were an older person, in Africa, for example, a younger person might come and touch my feet as a sign of greeting. But that would not mean that they would not take my house if my husband died. It would not mean that I had the right to vote. It would not mean that someone would not say to me, oh, you don't have a right to be here. What are you doing waiting in line at the hospital? You're taking a spot away from a younger person, a person who is more deserving. That is ageism, and they can coexist. Having a culture of respect can coexist along with these really insidious, deeply rooted types of ageism that we all have to face in older age, and that we sometimes internalize ourselves.
Well, any other comments? Well, I guess, I mean, I do agree that a respect and then also rights are not necessarily the one does not translate into the other. And so we have to be mindful. And that's why the work that you're doing and then what we're doing here is to kind of institutionalize, so to speak, that and bring out into the open. But I do think that like anything, any kind of ism has been created over years is a kind of a reflection of a cultural kind of or societal attitude, right? And I'm an eternal optimist from the East, and I do think that potentially, like in the United States, you know, I watch the growth of these, for example, ancestry.com, right? I mean, I know that when I came to this country, you know, many years ago, there was no talk. People don't want to look back. I mean, this is the youth country. I'm talking about the United States specifically. Everybody's forward looking. They want to, you know, they don't want to go back. So perhaps in my view that there is a beginning to appreciation. I want to know where I'm coming from. And then also to forward, and then Michael, maybe you can comment on this. Some of these artificial intelligence, right? Big data, and then can capture individuals' knowledge and also experience. And actually, I have a startup is creating. Think about virtual reality of yourself. You know, even after you passed away, you can be brought online. You know, in a 3D format and continue educating your, you know, your students or your family. So how do we feel about, you know, capture the intelligence and the know-how, the experience of older people? Does that have a role? Is that a right direction, you know, for technology and also for society and to go there?
Yeah, and you know, when you were asking the original question, I was thinking of it through the perspective of designers and developers and creators and innovators of this digital world that we all have to live in, and how they are fighting against old, outdated, ageist beliefs, and that maybe older users are too slow to pick up my product, or too whatever to pick up my user interface or product. And I'm just coming from an age tech summit from last week, where I was so inspired to see all of these innovators bringing their best thinking to solving a lot of these challenges. A lot of them were using artificial intelligence and making it seamless for people as they're going through these different changes in life. You know, stroke victims that maybe have speech impairments now can participate in the voice to text or voice assistant world due to this technology, and there's so many other examples that we could give. And it's interesting because they're seeing it in both a market opportunity, since, as we've mentioned, the number of people growing older is increasing, and also a social responsibility imperative, which is exciting. So you know, one of the things I keep thinking about is how is a global society, because these offerings are all global. How do we continue to elevate the importance of older adults and their contributions to the economy and everything else, so that more of the innovation is intentional in design? One last thing, you were talking about your role, Francis, and I was thinking about you know, when I go to a concert, often they will save their best 2 songs for the encore. And you know, how many people are doing their most valuable work in the encore of their life, in their encore roles? And you know, so kudos to you and everybody else who are doing encore roles that are meaningful, either at a local level or at a societal level. And you know, hopefully all of the digital world will continue to be intentional about helping support that work.
And Michael, can I build off of that? All of that resonates with me so deeply, and I have a little bit of FOMO or fear of missing out, as the kids say, about that conference. It's so incredible. You know, I think a lot of what you mentioned really resonates. One with some of the research that BCG's consumer practice has done around mature consumers, finding similar stereotypes as being really detrimental, both for you know, older people and for the business objectives of these organizations. Underestimating the share that are, you know, digitally active, especially on social media. And so all of that resonates, especially, you know, given my work on digital transformations, disproportionately in healthcare organizations that work with older people. To do a little bit of a double click on something you said. So I think, you know, everyone has their heads wrapped around generative AI and what the future entails. And I think organizations, public, private, you know, nonprofit, need to take a step back and also think about those fundamentals of human-centered design, which are often overlooked. Far too often, just like within the disability community, older people are an afterthought, or they're thought of reactively. If something goes wrong with the product and, you know, there's a user issue or there's a complaint, or, you know, in some cases, right, with accessibility, a lawsuit. But the reality is, by involving older persons in the design process from end to end, starting with identification of the actual problem we're solving for, user research, recruiting the right participants for that research, testing, and then continuous feedback after a product has been deployed. Like, that is absolutely fundamental, and far too often is not the case. To elaborate on one of the examples you shared, I too was dazzled to learn about the personal voice tool that Apple came out with, as I'm sure, you know, many of you are, and really just reading about the process that they took, engaging with members of the ALS community who are disproportionately older, in the 50+ range, really understanding some of the concerns, why it was so important for people to be able to leverage their voices even after their physical voice was gone. I just think that's a really powerful example. And then I think the final point, you know, as we've been talking about the role of caregivers, is to include family members and caregivers in that design process. Something we've seen in some of our healthcare research, enabling caregivers to have access to, you know, digital health tools and portals alongside their family member or loved one, just magnifies the impact and you know, just the comfort that people have. So just, you know, wanted to echo that really resonated with me. And I think this is something that, you know, in an international convention could really uphold as a standard.
Can I add something to that? Because what you said really resonated with me, and that patient perspectives, and I think with my patient advocacy lens or hat on, their perspectives are often sometimes different than caregivers. So it's really important that we design educational information. We invite caregivers to the discussion within our ad boards that we do to better understand the patient journey and the disease. So I completely agree with you that sometimes the caregiver does not want to disclose that they have stress themselves, that the focus should be on them when really the patient is the one going through the treatment. So it's really important that they take that into consideration and design with a caregiver lens in mind. So thank you for raising that. It's a really important point.
Yeah, just to build off the comment about design with the, you know, human experience in mind. And Michael knows that one of the most exciting initiatives that I'm involved in is this initiative called Voice, which is actually sponsored by the UK government, which provide a digital platform for people who are older to give, you know, input. In this case, it doesn't have to be kind of a sad topic. It could be, in one of the use cases, it was somebody was actually want to design clothing for older people. So they gather up, you know, people on this digital platform, give them some, you know, kind of samples to try it out. And so I think the technologies really enable us to have this kind of input and voice in a very systematized and sustainable and scalable way. And the private sector, along with, in this case, nonprofit, are really working together. So at the time when the UN is really beginning to put into action the legal framework, I think collectively, I certainly represent the private sector. I would say that I think we're not only ready, but we want to have this kind of a framework be ready. Very different from 2006 when the CRPD for people with disability was created, because at that time I think there was more of a separation of business and nonprofit, the civil society, and the business don't quite come together. So I think from timing standpoint, we are all ready for this kind of what I call the big play. Sylvia, I would love to hear from your perspective. I know that you are the vice president of the Global Initiative on Aging, which is a foundation that was newly minted. And can you share with us what was the rationale for GIA, and also what are some of the things that GIA looked to promote or to put into action in the coming month or years?
Thank you, Francis. So for us, we were created after we looked that over for 20 years, the UN has been dealing with these issues, and we wanted to create under their auspices something that will give us the platform to move things faster with the UN Convention, number one, and number two, to support the good practices that are out there and create new ones to help with education. Education is a big thing here. Education in all aspects, from upskilling to helping with the transition for different people at different times, and making that as something that is normal. Right now, we don't have, it's wonderful to hear about AARP, new project, but actually globally, there's a lack of inclusion on education for the seniors. And they don't even know that there is something out there, which is not much right now. So we need to give this allowance of education to be able to be part of society. If you're not able to educate, upskill, or find ways to do new things, and there is nothing out there to allow you to do that, or there's very little and very hard to find, how do you find that transition? How do you find that new purpose in your third or fourth quarter in life? Because this is what we want. We want to allow the possibility of more functionality in society of the ecosystem. The urban living is another point. Cities are not accommodated for the new reality. This is basically a paradigm that needs to shift, that needs to change. So GIA has come to help and support that process to governments, civil society, and the private sector. And we need more help.
Yes.
More people to join us.
Yeah, this is, I know, and that's why, I mean, you mentioned this upskilling and reskilling is so important. I think that's why UNITAR, in this case, who's also really helped us to pull this panel together, is such a great partner in helping to deliver some of this education at scale. And so last night I was kind of looking at the SDG, the 17 goals, because we really are the guests of SDG Summit today, and I was just looking at there are like 6 SDG goals that really kind of apply to the topic that we're talking about here, and I'm going to name it out and also ask the panelists to see whether there's a particular one that you have some perspective that you want to speak to. The number one is no poverty, right? So how do we, for example, a lot of older people, especially even in developed countries like the United States, fall below the poverty line. And so can we, and are there actions that we can take to really drive that goal home? The second one is good health and well-being. Now that is certainly an area that older people think about, and actually is part of one of the most important aspect of a personal life goals. And the goal number 8 is decent work and economic growth, which tied to some of the employment discussion we had. And number 9 is industry innovation and infrastructure. And Michael, you and I just did a selfie in front of that sign, so I'm sure you have something to say. And number 11 is sustainable cities and communities. And so again, you just mentioned, city, accessible city, longevity city. Can we imagine a world of the future where the city transportation system or mass transit, Hillary, I know that you are actually working on some projects, on the Parrot, transit system. So maybe you can speak to that. And last but not the least, number 17, the partnership for the goals. I mean, the fact that we have civil society, United Nations, and private sector here, it really takes a village to address this, what I call the societal challenge, but then also an opportunity. So any one of you want to just comment on any of these goals?
I will be happy to comment on number 2, health and well-being, because it's something that has not been mentioned. We know now the data, you all have provided so much data, which is very relevant for everything that is happening to give the perspective. But health is one of the big issues, because there is no point on simply keep on supporting more basically a society that is not having quality of life. So how do we do that? We know the data says it's about prevention. So again, it's not just about supporting with that preventative education to the seniors. It has to start way earlier. So we need to start with our, when we are very young, about what does it mean to look ahead, so that when I'm 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, we are aging gracefully and with options, at least from the health perspective. I will say that.
Can I do a little bit of elaboration on that? So I think there are a number of really kind of tactical, complex kind of policy and operational challenges in terms of providing the best possible holistic care that not only enables strong health outcomes, but all the social outcomes that you've been talking about and that we've all been discussing. And this is where kind of that collaboration between payers and providers, as well as government, comes into play. Without that, you can't reach those optimal outcomes. And so right now, especially in the US, when we think about the way that the payer and provider systems are set up, it's largely based on kind of a fee for service paradigm, right? And yet when we take a step back and think about holistic aging in place and the kind of full lives that older people deserve to live, right? That's not just a visiting nurse coming, right? That might mean clinical specialty access. That might mean personal care, right? Bathing, doing tasks in the home, help with cooking, and social support. We know there's a loneliness epidemic in the US and many other countries, but far too often those services, they're not reimbursed. It's hard to bundle them together, and that in turn has an impact on the supply of labor and kind of talent coming in. And so I think this is just an area in terms of re-envisioning that paradigm of care for seniors holistically and getting that collaboration and enablement from both sides. I think data is a huge part of that, just making it easier to do things like submitting claims, shared information across smaller providers and vendors. But there is a massive amount of work to be done in that space. And then while I know you spoke as well about this cities component, I will say that in preparation for this panel, I did some very important user research with my 95-year-old grandmother-in-law at Rosh Hashanah dinner the other night, and she painted a picture that's so consistent with everything that we're talking about. So going to the cities and communities SDG, someone who wants to engage in her community. She's had a leadership role in like civic government of her town, but for her and her friends to go to the community college where she wants to take courses, right, to get that training, to get that education, there's only one accessible parking spot. And so she says that it's hard for them to go. And so they have to take the courses online because they physically can't get there. And there's a parallel for the experience of going to the theater and, doing all of the other things that that we're kind of alluding to and talking about. So, in the US, this is a massive problem in cities around the world. It's a massive problem. And I really think that the aging in place, it's about the home. And by the way, here in the US, only 5% of homes are accessible. So that's, another cross sector problem that needs to be incentivized and solved for as well. But it's about the home as the epicenter, but that broader community as really the crux.
I would be remiss not to say something about health because we know that the healthcare system is already strained, and knowing that the aging population is growing and more patients and more older adults are going to need support and medical care, we're really going to be in need of more training and more collaboration. And it's exciting to be able to sit here on the panel because we are working very closely with Sylvia and really to try to increase that training and really equip caregivers, carers around the world with know-how on how to do simple things like food and nutrition or creating a safe environment, really communication with healthcare providers. So I'm excited to say that it really does take a village, and one sector cannot do it alone, but this is something that's coming in the fall, and we're really excited to be able to collaborate with Gia on this very important work. And it has to do with Sylvia's enthusiasm and Ambassador's enthusiasm to partner and identify, these unique collaborations, because they don't happen by themselves. You really need people who are passionate and interested in going outside of their usual lanes to work with you.
I want to mention the poverty SDG and a conversation that I had last year with someone from the Uganda Minister of Finance office. And she told a story of government subsidies that were going out to older adults during the global pandemic to help out. And only 20, according to her report, only 23% of older Ugandan residents had access to a mobile device and an online banking account in order to take the subsidies that were being offered, which is unfortunate. And you just see how these challenges with having meaningful access overlay each other. What concerns me is we're in a world where events are happening quickly. So that was a pandemic that triggered that. Also triggered by the pandemic in the United States is we had a time where people had to go and register to get the first levels of the vaccines, and it was going to the oldest of our population who couldn't navigate a lot of the sites because of the user design and ended up not getting the COVID vaccine. And because they couldn't sign up for it, and some probably died because of that. We had a conversation on the walk over here about how natural disasters are increasing globally because of other challenges, and the information and services that are available to the impoverished don't always get to the impoverished because they don't have digital access. So just the imperative of making sure that everyone in every community has access, because we know that the world's changing fast and things are happening quicker than they used to.
So I'm going to ask Bethany to do a last comment, and then I'm going to turn the floor over to Excel LeBlanc, who actually is the CEO of G3ICT, and as an organization, they really are the forerunner of understanding the importance of a UN convention. So Bethany, please make a comment, and we're going to turn the floor over to Excel.
Thank you. And I'm looking forward to hearing Excel's closing remarks. I just wanted to add that these are all really, really good points about the individual SDGs. The SDGs as a whole are universal. They're meant for all of us in developing and developed countries alike. But I wanted to point out that they're particularly important for older people in developing countries. Already in 2022, more than twice as many people over the age of 60 live in less developed countries as live in more developed regions. So just to flag that this is particularly important as we think about how the world is developing as a whole. And we're so glad to be working in the same ecosystem together with G3ICT.
So now we're gonna ask Excel to make a closing comment, please.
Thank you very much, Frances. And I must say, I've been fascinated by all the contributions this morning. Looking at the diversity of knowledge that came out during the panel was just fantastic. So thank you all very, very much. Thank you to UNITAR for hosting this meeting. It's really important to realize this is an incredibly challenging global issue that we're all facing with. We heard moving from 1 billion older person to 2 billion older person. In a way, there are not too many venues where you can actually affect change. So we are very happy that today we are actually next to the General Assembly room of the United Nations, where all the chief of states have a chance to network and learn about possible solutions for the future. So it's the right place, right time, and thank you again to UNITAR for the hosting of this meeting. It looks like a very obvious conclusion is that at this point in time, a convention on the right of older persons is really a must for a better future. And we heard many arguments in justifying actually that type of development. One is even today in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and the Development Agenda, older persons are not really explicitly part of the whole thinking process, and that's a severe issue. Has been the same, by the way, for persons with disabilities in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So let's not repeat the same mistake. It's time just to plant a stick in the ground and get going with that type of assertive convention that binds member states that ratify it. Number two, we also heard that the convention may act as a catalyst for the ecosystem to take shape, meaning getting together the folks who are caregivers, the private sector, local government, which play a huge, important role in that whole equation. So that in fact, step after step between the national governments, local government, the private sector, or representation of older persons, the caregivers, there may be like of a symbiotic type of exchange that extract the best knowledge from all those constituents. It looks like if we look back at the history of the United Nations, I want to give credit to Ambassador Gallegos, who actually as chair of the committee which actually prepared the Convention on the Right of Persons with Disabilities for almost 4 years here at the United Nations. When Ambassador Gallegos was chairing that committee, the strict rule at the UN was that you could not have anybody from the outside world participate in the negotiation in the secure room where the negotiation was happening. Well, what was remarkable at the time is that for the first time in the history of negotiation of treaties at the UN, Ambassador Gallegos managed to get online bulletin board to start giving inputs to the delegates during the negotiation. And the result of that was that hundreds of advocates from all around the world were able to provide inputs in the text of the convention, which is, in my opinion, the reason why that convention is so effective, so very practical, and so very much representing the reality of persons with disability. So that's, background tells me that for a convention on the right of older persons, the participation of older persons and caregivers and all persons who are involved, including the private sector and technology companies and others, is crucial for its proper elaboration. Now, the good news is we do have around this table the nucleus of all the ingredients and the participants we need to succeed, right? Certainly UNITAR has a long history of, helping government and local governments, so the CFAL network, in terms of implementation of good practices. The Global Initiative for Aging and the role that UNDESA and Bethany are playing is there. So now we know there is a will and there is a focus, which is just terrific. So we can see things possibly moving. I also know that Ambassador Gallegos, who is very committed and enthusiastic about that whole plan, will be there to actually help pushing that process within the UN community. And finally, I see that private sector, major organizations like ARP and others are also totally, enthusiastic and proactive in trying to do it. Certainly at GCICT, with our many years of commitment to make technology accessible to persons with disability,
shortly there will be a higher.
we are definitely in line with that objective as well, which is to make sure that the digital inclusion of older persons is a fundamental element of a convention on the right of older persons. I would say that I want to thank Frances West, who will be chairing our Committee on Aging Persons at GCICT. We look forward actually in a few weeks in Washington, we'll have the Enabling Summit where you will be chairing another session of the same type on the same issues. Anyway, so the result of that whole discussion today for me is, I think it is very clear why it needs to happen, how it can happen, and who are the key players that will make it happen. And I'm very optimistic after this whole discussion today. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Axel, and thank you, the panelists, for braving the rain and to come to like multiple security checkpoint. And I would just say that with the last, you mentioned a quote, and there's a quote that I use a lot when I talk to people about this topic of aging. That is, this is a human condition, and that all of us will get there. It's just a matter of sooner or later. And so bottom line, this is not a topic about them, it's a topic about all of us. So with that, I thank you for your time, and we will continue this this journey together, and it will take a village, but I think all of us are committed to make this the best world to come together. Thank you very much.